Hey, I'm Anthony,
And I'm Tyler.
and today we'll be talking about Aristotelian essentialism. We'll explain what it is and how it has been applied to contemporary developmental economics through the Human Development Index created by philosopher Martha Nussbaum and economist Amartya Sen. Eudaimonia, translated from Greek, is best defined as flourishing or fulfillment, which is strived toward for its own sake and not to some other end. It is an objective state that is obtained by individual beings in many different ways, because everyone is in a different place in life, with different capabilities, knowledge, needs, etc. Accordingly, the idea is intentionally left vague, with no specific set of instructions. Aristotle conceived eudaimonia as a continuous activity and not a specific state. If it were a specific state, we could be passively fulfilled just sitting around doing nothing. But because eudaimonia is an idea that involves continuous activity and striving, it is difficult and not easy to obtain in any way. Most importantly, a eudaimon life is an idea that corresponds to the specific kind of creature that is living it, that tends to the whole soul of the individual and not just one part. Humans are predominantly rational creatures, but we also have emotions and, at a more basic level, animalistic instincts. Aristotle thought it important to tend to the entire human soul, and not just our highest faculties. So the idea of eudaimonia is one that fulfills our basic needs and nurtures our more complex reasoning processes.
Okay, so why not just call it happiness? So he puts forward the notion in his Nicomachean Ethics that eudaimonia should not be confused with simple ideas of happiness or pleasure. He says, and I quote, "To say that happiness is the best good is perhaps to say something that is apparently commonplace, and we still need to clear our statement of what it is." So this flawed equating of eudaimonia with such ideas could lead to conceptions of the good life as one of things like doing drugs and only seeking to maximize pleasure. Rather, for Aristotle, eudaimonia is a concept that includes the rational organization of one's life and the pursuit of the virtues, most importantly. Eudaimonia is a state of fulfilled being that affects all parts of an individual's soul. It is then quite possible that doing things that do not immediately make an individual happy is part of the good life, in fact, for reasons that could contribute to the greater good or potentially help the person to overcome some obstacle. So eudaimonia is not simply happiness, it is a much greater concept.
So humans versus other things. Eudaimonia is something that Aristotle acknowledged exists for many beings, but it must be a certain way for human beings as a result of the specific way that we are. Aristotle thought that we were essentially different from plants and other animals because we have a rational part of our soul that we can use to organize our lives how we want. We are, therefore, far more complex than plants and other animals, and our version of the eudaimon life is different. For example, eudaimonia for a plant could be simply to fulfill its needs in the form of sunlight, water, minerals, etc. Some important components of humans living the eudaimon life are obtaining proper nutrition and getting exercise, the animal part of our souls, but also using reason to organize one's life and live virtuously among others and oneself.
Okay, so here's a pre-Socratic example, and this shows how kind of thinkers prior to Aristotle were kind of contemplating similar questions of the good life and what flourishing might be. And we can reference Heraclitus of Ephesus here, born around 540 BC, and he states, "Right thinking is the greatest excellence, and wisdom is to speak the truth and act in accordance with nature while paying attention to it." So although this is a thinker that is years before Aristotle's time, we can see him coming to similar conclusions to Aristotle about what the eudaimon life may be.
So what is essentialism? An essential property of something, i.e. a human being, is a property that it must have in order to still fall under the definition of that thing. This is contrasted with an accidental property, which is a property that it may or may not have. It does not matter to the core being of the thing. Essential properties of things are properties that are necessary, while accidental properties of things are properties that are possible but not necessary. An example from Aristotle is a house builder is the cause of a house, but a flute player may be a coincidental cause. The point here is that a house must necessarily have been built by a house builder, but a person does not necessarily have to be a flute player. An example of our own is the difference between labeling Tyler as being a person who wears red pants or a person that has the faculty of reason. In this example, it is not essential to Tyler's being defined as a human being, and he is wearing his red pants, but is quite essential to his being defined as a human being that he has the faculty of reason to organize his life and act as humans do.
Okay, so an interesting question that follows from this introduction of essential properties is, if a human has been deprived of the opportunity to develop fully, why are they still human? So say that a person, for example, gets into a freak car accident and has to have their leg amputated. In this case, the person would have been deprived of the capability to use their leg, but they would still be human because they should have the capability to use their leg. So in this case, this person is not suddenly inhuman because the leg is lost. We know that this person is the type of animal that should have their leg. So Aristotle in this case would say that this is not only true of human beings. For example, a blind hawk is still a hawk, even though it is missing something essential to it being a hawk, its eyesight. So furthermore, this thinking can be applied to inanimate objects as well. For instance, something that is essential to a pen is the ink that it holds. However, if that pen runs out of ink, it does not cease to be a pen. It just no longer is in a eudaimon state because it has been deprived of its full potential, part of that being its ability to write.
Aristotle says, "For we scarcely have the stamp of happiness if we are extremely ugly in appearance, ill-bred, living in a solitary life, or childless, and have it even less, presumably, if our children or friends are totally bad, or were good, but have died." In this statement, Aristotle is claiming that there are certain circumstances whereby a human is probably not going to be able to come to a full realization of eudaimonia, but they are still human because they should be able to do these things. We also need to know what is essential to a human being to know what actions are right or wrong for Aristotle, because we have to come to a base state of humanity that should be permissible for all human beings. When we can define specific properties of human beings that make us who we are, then we can apply them to all people and ensure that all people are retaining these properties correctly and not being deprived of them. It is therefore right, according to Aristotle, to cater to the specific human capabilities and properties that we have, such as locomotive motion and the characteristic of eating food to be nourished. It is wrong to deprive anyone of these characteristics making us specifically human, because in doing so a person is being deprived of their human potential. Coming to conclusions about the base properties of human beings to Aristotle makes it easier to have conversations about what is right or wrong in relation to them. Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen applied this concept of Aristotelian essentialism to contemporary development economics. Martha Nussbaum, in her defense of Aristotelian essentialism, articulates 10 basic human functional capabilities that are listed on this slide. We'll review number 4 and 5 in detail. Number 4, being able to use the 5 senses, being able to think, imagine, and reason, is essential to being a human being. In this function, Nussbaum is describing an intellectually stimulating life. And an example of this would be a person who never stops trying to learn new things, whether through direct observation or inquiry. Number 5, to be able to have attachments to those people and things that surround us. This is also essentially human. This means that one must have the ability to love, grieve, feel longing, and/or gratitude for something or someone else. A person who lacks this would be hard to define as a human being.
When looking at all 10 of these capabilities, one must ask what exactly makes them essentialist. These capabilities are essentialist because they are all fundamental to what makes a human being a human being. Aristotle would say that they are necessary, not accidental characteristics of a human being. These capabilities are Aristotelian because they all have the final cause of eudaimonia, accounting for the animal part of our soul as well as the rational part. Looking at the list, this is quite clear. Being able to live a full life, laugh and play, and have attachments to others are all marks of a eudaimon life. These capabilities also include both a human being's animal and rational part of the soul. When Nussbaum talks about the ability to avoid pain and/or pursue pleasure, and the ability to be in good health, she is talking about the animal part of a human being's soul. When she mentions our ability to decide what is good and what is not, and our ability to think, imagine, and reason, she's talking about the rational part of our soul. Lastly, these capabilities are left vague on purpose because eudaimon life looks different for different human beings in different circumstances. Although each of these capabilities are essential to human beings, they will manifest themselves in different ways depending on the circumstance. This is an idea that Aristotle believed to be integral to eudaimonian life.
We need to pay close attention to things like context, history, and culture. Aristotle did this on purpose, because everything depends on being in context for eudaimonia. Therefore, right or virtuous action cannot be articulated in terms of exceptionalist generalities without compromising some sort of completeness and/or unification. as can be seen with this quote by Plato in the Republic. A more contemporary example of this is if a Nazi soldier had disobeyed orders during World War II in one of the Nazi extermination camps. He would have been acting morally. Although we would like to say that it's moral to follow orders from authority, that is not the case if those orders are telling you to murder someone.
Applying Aristotelian essentialism to contemporary development economics was born out of the fact that using GDP to measure whether or not the people of a nation are flourishing did not yield accurate data. This is for a number of different reasons. One of these is that GDP does not account for the inequality of wealth within nations. A huge percentage of a nation's citizens could be living below the poverty line, with a small percentage holding on to most of the nation's wealth, and the GDP would not at all account for this. So GDP does not account for many other things, including how long a nation's citizens live, how healthy they are, whether or not they have time for recreation or not, among many other things that indicate whether or not a nation's people are doing well. Aristotelian essentialism introduces a framework that does not include these elements, and it is the reason Nussbaum and Sen's Human Development Index has been embraced by the UN and most of its member states as an accurate measurement of a nation's population's well-being. All right, that was our project. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Anthony.
See you later.